We say things like, maybe later, perhaps another time, or I'll see you tomorrow. But for some of us, there won't be a tomorrow. Listen as your worst nightmares come to life. These nightmares have become someone's reality. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 26 of The Murder Project. This is the debrief episode on the Kelly Ann Bates murder and that whole horrific story that goes along with it. Now, I just want to let you guys know up front, we are going to be talking about some of the details of her murder. As I did in last episode, we'll try not to linger too much in there, but get the points that we think need to be out there. So just a heads up for that. If you're new to the Murder Project, the Debrief is an episode where I sit down with my good friend and former police officer Mike Smith to discuss the cases further. In the Debrief, we discuss the cases from both sides of the aisle, theories that we might have, and anything we think needs a second look. The Debrief is an unscripted and off-the-cuff commentary about the cases that we are currently covering. The hope of the Debrief is to break the case down further, but in a relaxed environment with the true crime we love, but also some laughter. So let's get the episode started. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Murder Project. I'm Justin Crowley. With me as always is my best homie, Mike Smith. How are you, sir?
What up? You know what? I can tell you right now, I'm pretty fired up to talk about this because it's awful, and I just got a lot of really strong opinions about this one.
Yeah.
So for anyone who's listening, I might say some things that you may not agree with, and that's okay because we all have opinions. I think there were some very fundamental failures on people in positions of responsibility in this victim's life, and I'm going to speak pretty plain about that. So if anybody's like, those poor parents, or it's not their fault, I might have a different opinion, and if you don't like it, that's okay.
Yeah, we can all have our own opinions, and that's why we encourage everybody to reach out and talk back and forth with us so we can discuss those things. I know this is kind of a one-sided conversation, as in Mike and I are talking to you guys, and you can't immediately respond back, but you can over the social medias and stuff.
Yeah.
So if you have anything you want to ask us, please do.
Please do.
We have those avenues available for everyone. But it, like Mike said, it is... There is some areas where I think that there was lack of oversight, and fundamentally, I think that they, as in Kelly's parents, dropped the ball in a lot of different areas, but we can talk about that as we go along. So let's just start at the top, you know? So Kelly starts dating this man that, in the last episode, I referred to him as Dave a lot because that's kind of, I wanted to keep that going as far as long as, you know, as far as what everybody thought. If you listen to part one, you know his name's not Dave, it's really James. So we're going to refer to him as his real name, James, because we all know at this point that he is James, and he's a complete liar and a maniac.
And a woman beater.
Yeah.
And a total creep.
Child molester,
and
rapist.
Yeah, they'll find
a lot of other things.
All this will come out. No wonder he had to pick a different name, because if anybody were to, look this guy up, now this is back in the mid '90s, so we're not Google machining yet.
There's no Google machine.
But you could still ask around. Maybe even if somebody had the wild hair to go, pay a service for like a background check. Not that anybody would do that.
Yeah, not even. No way.
But this guy obviously went through a lot of effort to conceal himself because he'd already had multiple failed relationships and a failed marriage because he couldn't stop slugging his women.
Yeah. Beating them up and torturing them. And,
exactly.
And that all goes kind of into where in the part one I was saying, like, it's sad to say, but every experience can be a learning experience, even if it's for the worst. So James is kind of sharpening his skills as being a terrorizer.
Yeah, a predator.
A predator.
Yeah, and he realized the best way for me to get the satisfaction that I want in being a dirt person is to find somebody who literally doesn't know any better.
Yeah. He had to keep dropping the age range as far as the women that he dated, because one of them was, 16?
Yeah.
And then, so
16.
he had a 16 and a 20 in there that he had dated, beaten up, got one of them pregnant, continued to beat her while she was pregnant.
Yeah.
And then he realized after these relationships failed, and thank goodness those women were able to get out.
Yes, thank goodness indeed, because look at what the final result was going to be.
Yeah, for someone. And unfortunately it was for Kellyanne, but he crafted those skills as he was getting in and out of these failed relationships where he was already beating and torturing these women.
Mm-hmm.
And then so he decided, oh, what I really need to do is I need to get a more vulnerable person.
That's right.
I need to get someone who has less experience, less knowledge, because I want to be able to shape and mold every way they are thinking about this relationship.
Yeah, I want to completely encapsulate them into my deranged fantasy.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that I want to get out. We looked up the age of consent in England, and it's 16 years of age. You're not considered an adult until you're 18 years of age.
Right.
So even though you are allowed to start having, sexual encounters or sexual relationships at the age of 16 in England, you are still not considered an adult until you're 18. And that's really important for all the things that I'm going to say here in the next, half hour, 40 minutes, 5 hours, whatever it is because as we know, when Dave/James Patterson Smith meets Kellyanne Bates, she's only 14, and he meets her because she babysits around the neighborhood that they live in Manchester, England. And he realizes right away that this is somebody that he can manipulate. So he starts edging into her life, walking her home, speaking kindly to her, spending obviously too much time around her because none of us know who these third-party people are that they met him through, but the freedom to be in her life right at the jump is already startling to me, and we haven't even gotten to the parts that are weird yet. But before we dive into that, there's something really important that I wanted to address that I have just an absolute fundamental issue with, and that is that Kellyanne Bates was referred to as mature for her age.
Yes. Quite often it's in the research.
And that's a nice compliment.
Yep.
But I was also referred to as mature for my age growing up. And apparently the prerequisite for that is that you can hold a conversation with an adult.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's all I ever did. I'm a talker. I can talk to anyone. I can mold myself to the conversation and kind of fit in anywhere. And if that's all it takes to be considered mature for your age, then I have an issue with that, because I can assure you I was not a mature person. I would argue that I wasn't even an actual well-functioning adult until I was in my mid-20s, and I'll freely admit that. I have no problem with it. I'd say 26. That's a good round number. Before I was actually a responsible adult that wasn't as immature as I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Or maybe I said that wrong, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I got you.
I was still pretty immature, and so whenever people say that, I just get the vision. Now, I don't know her, and really there isn't a lot of information to really iron this out, but I envision Kellyanne as like a quiet, maybe sticks to herself, has maybe some hobbies, doesn't really have a whole lot going on socially, so she spends her time doing things responsibly, like watching other children, which is great. It's great to be that person in a community, to have something like that to rely on. There's people in my family that did that, and even there was times as a teenager that I did that.
Yeah, I think it said she played hockey with college-age girls, something.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I definitely think that there is that people were looking at that and saying exactly like you said, she was, people said that she was mature for her age, but and we're making this analysis now that we are older and we're looking back.
Yeah, of course.
But we're still close enough to our teenage years, in my opinion, where I think when people do say things like, that guy's mature for his age, or that, and it's now that we're a little bit older and we're looking back at that, it's not really that simple, because you still have a developing brain. You're still doing childlike things. And just like you said, you're referred to as a mature for your age person, but at the same time, you're still going through all life lessons of anybody else that they would have to go through. And then you get to a point where you look back and you're like, but was I really?
Yeah, and I'm saying no, I wasn't. Yeah. I was still just as much as a reckless, hormonal, moody teenager as anybody would be at that age. But what's important is she had established this relationship that in her community that she was more mature for her age. And apparently that afforded a great deal of latitude with how she spent her time. So after James Patterson Smith had started to groom her, they started seeing each other. Now she's 14 still.
Yeah, and it even says that in the research that when he came across her babysitting in the neighborhood, he was immediately smitten with her. Okay, and she's 14.
Yeah,
you don't get to do that.
So he portrays himself as a 32-year-old.
Right.
That's already an 18-year difference. And let me put it to you for another angle. He was already an adult when she was born.
Right.
So for those of you that are like, man, I don't see the problem. I mean, she's 14, he's 32. That's not a big difference. He could have enlisted in the military.
Yeah.
When she was being born.
Yeah. So there is and here's another, let's look at it this way. So there's 6.5 or a little over 6 years difference between my wife and I.
Mm-hmm.
My wife's older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at it and you say there's a 6-year difference between us right now, you don't notice that.
Mm-hmm.
But let's back that up a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So let's say she was a senior in high school and her and I started dating.
Yeah.
I would have been a 5th grader.
Yeah.
That part of it is weird.
Yes.
That when you look at it that way, you're like, no, that's not. But when I met her, I was 25 and she was 31.
Yeah.
That's totally different.
Totally different because you've been an adult for a little bit.
Yeah.
Or at all, because Kellyanne Bates was not.
Yeah, and so that's weird when you look at it from the senior to the 5th grader.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so weird once we get older.
Right.
But then times that by 3.
Right.
And then you have this situation.
And as we know from the first episode, that's only the age that he's saying that he is. He's not 32.
No.
He's 48.
48 years old.
So he is 34 years older than this girl.
Yeah.
And so, I mean...
if there's a way to make it worse, that's it.
That's it.
That's a way to make it worse.
It's terrible.
And allowing people, especially when nobody knows who this guy is.
That's right.
And they're just like, well, he's 32 and she's 14. And somehow there is this kind of attitude in the fact of, well, and then even later on when they find out that that's not his real age,
mm-hmm.
everything continues.
Right.
And why does it continue? Well, let's get into some of that.
So, yeah, they start seeing each other. And so they start seeing each other when she's 14. And they she starts spending like every weekend with him.
Yeah.
And I can't help but wonder what exactly her parents thought at this time. Was she lying about her whereabouts? Was she telling them like straight up, hey, I'm staying at my boyfriend's house for this weekend? And they're just like, okay. But...
Or is it I'm staying at a friend's house, right. But it's every weekend?
Every weekend.
And I know that in the beginning, things are going to start off a little slower.
Sure.
He's in the process of what we now know is because of everything that's happened is he's grooming her.
Mm-hmm.
So as we mentioned, he picked someone that was a really young age. I'm sure that while he's standing out in the neighborhood talking to her and he's like, hey, so you ever had a boyfriend? And she's like, no. And he's like, bingo.
Yep.
He's got his mark.
Oh,
because,
perfect. Why not? You're so pretty.
Yeah, exactly. He starts talking her up. And it even says in there that, in the research that in the beginning, he's so nice and, so nice to her that she immediately falls for him, in which, I mean, who can blame her in a situation like that, which I'm not. But it's one of those situations where, like you said, he's probably like, why? You're so pretty. You're so this. You're so. Mm-hmm. She immediately gets comfortable with him, and then he sinks his hooks in. He's got her, and that's why I wanted to point out in part 1 that Kellyanne doesn't know what a dating relationship is previous to this.
Yeah, she has zero experience.
Yeah, she has no idea. She has nothing to base anything off of because this is a first for her, and that plays out well for James because he can mold this whole scenario. He can mold everything.
Yeah, he has all the power. So much so to the fact that for the first 2 years that they are seeing each other, that he never has to go meet her parents.
Yeah.
And this is number one in my what the absolute hell was going on. I can't imagine at any point in any family, English or American, that a 14-year-old is going to see a boyfriend or girlfriend
and staying the night
for every weekend, or at least most weekends, and the parents never ask to meet this person.
Yeah, never comes around, never shows up.
Right.
They're obviously probably not dropping her off at a school dance or, something like that.
Well, he lives in the community, don't he?
Yeah.
So, she's probably walking, or he's walking with her. We don't know.
Well, I would assume, based off the fact that he met her while she was babysitting in the neighborhood,
right.
Perhaps they live close.
They live close enough that she can just bebop down the street. But it's not the fact that they didn't meet him, like, right away. You know what? When you're saying, like, maybe they're taking things slow, or, maybe they want to ease into it. 2 years.
2 years has gone by.
She's been seeing this joker for 2 years, and her parents don't know a damn thing about him, and I just absolutely believe that is not right. I don't think that's right. That to me, that's wrong. You should definitely know what your juvenile child is doing and who they're seeing to the most of your ability.
Yeah.
Even if they are mature for their age, or very responsible, or hanging out with, college-age kids.
They're still kids.
That's still your kid. I just don't understand how this didn't happen. Do I feel for the parents? Of course. This is the worst possible scenario.
Yep.
One of the worst possible scenarios to what can happen to your child. And I hate that for them. But I just have to wonder, because you can't find much about it, why they thought this was a good idea. Was I once a teenager and I wanted, like, a little more room to, like, spread my wings?
A little more freedom. Yeah.
And I got that.
Yeah.
And I got that. But my family still required knowing where I was and who I was with. And guys, this is in the mid-90s. Yeah. This isn't 1890s.
Yeah.
This is the 1990s. It's pretty modern.
Yeah, for the majority of the people that are, I would say, almost the entire group that listens to this podcast, we were all alive whenever this happened.
That's right. Yeah, and the very first time I ever heard about this case, that's the part that struck me as the most odd, is that she was dating a supposedly 32-year-old man in the mid-90s and nobody said anything?
Yeah. And
so 2 years later, they actually meet. So she's 16 now, and she has left school. I don't believe she graduated. I think she left school.
Yeah, I would assume that, especially when they started seeing each other more, and then that's kind of where I wanted to roll into, is whenever she starts spending more time with James, and then he's kind of calling to her house and building this relationship with her mom, saying, oh, hey, I haven't even seen Kellyanne this weekend. She out doing some stuff that she's not supposed to be doing. And she's thinking to herself, well, maybe this, Dave guy, because she thinks his name's Dave, maybe he's somewhat responsible. And then he comes over, and finally, at this point, like you said, 2 years later, he finally comes over to the house and meets them.
Yeah.
And when he walks in the door, her dad immediately like, oh, this fellow looks a little bit older. And they're like, yeah, he's 32. And then her dad is, obviously, they're almost the same age.
Right.
So her dad's probably looking at him. And if someone said that you and I looked the same age, even though there's a couple years difference, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
But if somebody looked at me and then my dad or someone's dad and was like, yeah, they're the same age. No, you can tell the difference. And Kellyanne's dad's like, yeah, man, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think he's 32.
Yeah.
And then it comes out, oh, well, he's actually 48. And then her dad says something to the fact of her mom, it says her mom, like the hairs on the neck stand up, and she gets this weird vibe about him. And then her dad asks her, like, hey, are you sure this is what you really want? And then she says something to the effect of, well, I would have been with older people anyway. And then that they seem like that just kind of, okay.
I'm sure they had far more feelings about it, but I don't see how that was something that they were like, okay, that's cool. We're just going to go ahead and let that ride. Okay, this is their daughter's first relationship ever.
Yeah, and they know this.
And after all this time, years have gone by, they do not know that this is actually a established grown man.
Yeah.
Who is 32. Oh, wait, he's 48.
Yep.
And they're like, wait, what? No, absolutely not. This is so weird. Her hair stands up on the back of her neck is what her mom says.
Yeah, she asked about, because it said she kind of asked about town, about if anybody knew this Dave Smith who was 32, and nobody knows who he is.
I mean.
And so she's kind of like, And then somehow this relationship continues, and my thought is maybe they had one of these talks at night where they're like, well, I guess, nothing's bad's happened yet, and they've already been with each other for 2 years. What's the worst that can happen?
Maybe they did, and I hope that they did to a degree, because at least they weren't talking about it, but
no action, but they talked about it.
I just know that there is no scenario where even somebody I knew well, I would be comfortable with that. Even if it wasn't my kid.
Yeah.
And I heard about it,
yep.
I would not be comfortable with it. And I would be vocal about it. I'd be like, oh, yeah, my daughter, she started seeing this guy. I'm like, oh, yeah, how old's your daughter? And she's 16. He's 48. I'd be like, are you out of your mind?
Yeah, come again?
What did you just say?
Yeah.
Do you need some cognitive recalibration? He's 48. He should be on his way to retirement in the next decade and change.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. And it is crazy to me that while they're kind of doing this, the mom at least is putting in an effort to somewhat investigate him, but there's no follow through anywhere. And it gets to the point where they start talking about Kellyanne spending more time with him. And the time keeps getting longer as it goes, to the point that they say that she starts coming home and she looks horrible. Like her hair is messed up. She hasn't bathed in
she's
quite a while.
Covered in bruises.
She has bruises on her body already. And let's see. Yeah, greasy, unkept hair. Clothes were always dirty. She had bad posture. Her head was always down, chin to her chest. And for us, I know that's like, for me, that would have been like a huge red flag. And that's why I said in the first episode, I was like, this to me, now I know everybody doesn't have the same training and background and all those things, but those are pretty obvious things.
So I would safely say, yes, those are pretty obvious things, especially if that's your child.
Yeah. And even if you go off of the assumption of, which she told her parents in the beginning, that she had been jumped at school.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just it. I can tell you this right now. If my kid comes home and either one of them have bruises on their face, and I start to notice that they don't want to take baths anymore, they don't care about their personal appearance, they look like their soul's been ripped out of their body because they don't do anything but stare at the floor, I'm going to be like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, man. Hey, are you good?
Are you good? Is something happened to you? Oh, yeah, the kids at school are just beating me up. Oh, okay. Well, I thought it was something major.
Yeah.
And you just go on about your business.
You're like, oh, yeah, that'll happen.
You don't check into any of that, to the point where your own child's physical appearance is deteriorating right in front of your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
They're spending time with some guy you don't even really know. All you know about him is that he's a grown man and he's dating your daughter.
Yeah.
And we're not connecting any of these dots.
Yeah.
Zero? No dots? And then...
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking that's bizarre.
Yeah. And then on top of that, when your child is at their most vulnerable spot that they've ever been in their life, because like we always said, what do we always say? The worst thing that happened to you is the worst thing that happened to you.
Sure.
This is the worst. She's in some of the worst parts of her life right now. And she thinks that because James is so worried about where she is all the time and is always checking on her and constantly looking in on her, she thinks that's love.
Yeah, she thinks it's normal.
She
doesn't know it's not.
Normal love.
Mm-hmm.
And she's at the most vulnerable points of her life. And then she gets in this situation where she locks horns with her mom.
Mm-hmm.
And her mom gives her an ultimatum. And she says to her, listen, you're going to have to start shaping up. You're going to have to get all this together or you can get out. why the hell would you say that to a kid?
Right.
Why would you say that to a kid that has the opportunity to leave?
That's right.
You already notice that she looks this way,
Right.
that she has these telltale signs. She has bruising. Her personal appearance is in the garbage. And then you say, oh, well, if you're not going to tell us where you are and what you've been doing, because we want to be cool parents and give you freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? If you don't like it, you don't like these rules around this house, you can just go. What teenager is not just going to be like, oh, wait, so I don't have to follow any of your rules anymore. So I don't have to live under your roof anymore. So I don't have to, because when you're a kid, it doesn't matter what the situation is. The grass is always greener on the other side.
That's right.
And at this stage in her life, if it was anything like me or most kids, you're right at the age of 16 of where you're close to leaving the house anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And you're counting the days down for school. You have more responsibility. Like for me, you can drive. You got all this stuff going on. I'm assuming she doesn't drive. I mean, it doesn't say, but I don't know.
Right.
And then you give her a free pass to walk out the door and into the waiting arms of a man that's been grooming her and torturing her already at this point for 2 years.
For 2 years, and he probably the best news he'd ever gotten.
Yeah, she goes back to his house, and she's like, yeah, I got in a fight with my mom, and she told me I could leave, so I'm out of here. Is it cool if I live with you? And he's like, yeah, I got you.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, she's already dropped out of school.
I would assume she did.
Yeah, I think I read that she had left school at this point.
Yeah, and then once she gets over there, at least her... Oh, no, she did have a sibling, her brother.
That's right.
Her brother goes in.
Yeah.
Her brother goes in and tries to check on her. And every time he goes over there, James just tells him that she's not there. And so you get into this point where Kellyanne is removed from the house. She's gone. She's having zero contact with her parents.
Mm-hmm.
Her brother can't find her.
Right.
And it was even said that if neighbors got a little suspicious about her and not having seen her, he would allow her to be seen from a second-story window. And nobody thinks that this is odd in the least little bit. What 16-year-old locks themselves inside of a house and never leaves?
Right. And then you got to come back to the point that she's still not a legal adult yet.
Yeah.
So her parents do have the ability to contact the police and be like, hey, I need to check on my daughter. She's only 16 years old.
And she hasn't come home in months or whatever.
Yeah, or she hasn't come in and insert, amount of time here.
Yeah.
And I need to check on her. She's in a relationship with a guy named Dave, and he's X number of years old, and I think he lives at this address, but I don't believe that ever happened.
Yeah, because like Mike mentioned earlier, with the age of consent versus when you become an adult, and we've talked about this in a previous episode where the age of consent versus when you become an adult, like in Texas, it's age of consent is 17. Mm-hmm. You become an adult at 18. So you still have that 1 year window as a parent to be responsible for that child. Whereas in this situation, it's 2 years. So you're exactly right. If at some point the parents actually came to their senses and said, you know what, maybe this is wrong. Maybe we shouldn't be doing this. They could have called the police, like you said, and said, hey, let's go check on her, and then we want to take her home. They could have forcibly removed her from that house and been like, you have to go home with your parents.
Yeah, because she...
If I'm understanding this law right.
Right, yeah, because she's still their child.
Yep.
And there might be some other laws there. I'm not from England, so I wouldn't presume to think that there isn't maybe something out there that would bring like, hey, they're in an established relationship. But I mean, like, as far as I know, she's still a child, and her residence of record was with her parents.
Yes.
And so they could have, I just have the hardest time assuming or looking at these different accounts of this and thinking that all this time passed and they never thought to bring her home.
Yeah.
Or to look into it at all.
This is your daughter.
I know.
And your daughter's with a 48-year-old man.
And that's just my personal bias, and I realize that. But I don't know anybody else personally that knows that I'm talking about this case, that I've shared this case with, that I've just even talked about it, even briefly with, that didn't just, like, look at me like, you are joking.
Yeah.
How was that okay? Good question. We're all wondering the same thing, but somebody thought it was okay because They allowed it to continue.
Yeah, it was allowed to run its course.
And I just know that even in my family, it was a pretty standard rule. Until you were an adult, it was 2 years. 2 years up or 2 years down.
Yeah.
So if you were 16 and you wanted to date a 14-year-old, you had to have the permission of their parents. And like my mom would have had to been cool with it.
Yeah.
Or if I was 18 and 16 or 20 and 18, it's just always the way it was. It was just kind of established that way in my household. Now I'm sure that's different for everybody, and everybody's experiences may be different, but I think I can safely say we can all agree that a 14-year-old girl's first relationship ever should not be with a 48-year-old man.
Ever. And that's, like Mike said, both of us share that opinion.
I'll die on that hill.
Yeah, but
holla at me.
That's one of those things where you may think to yourself that you don't see anything wrong with it. You could never convince either one of us of anything different in this scenario. And, if you've got a good reason as to why something like this could work out, I'm all ears. But I'll tell you this, you can't change my mind.
Yeah, you're not going to change my mind, but I'd sure like to hear somebody else's opinion try to justify this.
Yeah, because there's no way, in my opinion, there is no reason why a 48-year-old man should ever be with a 14-year-old, a child.
Yeah, this isn't feudal England.
Yeah, this is
1990s.
Yeah, and you can't, and there's something else about what type of man would want to be with a
that's all I'm talking
14-year-old.
About. The age difference is only made weird because why on earth would anybody, 48-year-old man or woman, be interested in the opposite sex at 14 years of age?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it was a 48-year-old woman and a 14-year-old boy. It's still wrong and super weird.
It's so weird. It's so weird. I can't, I'll never get past that. And so let's roll into where I feel like when we're talking about Kellyanne not only being seen from this second story window of his house and why that is and why Kelly is not communicating with her family anymore. And in my opinion, this is when James already has, when she goes into his household, he has full control.
Mm-hmm.
So now this is when, in my opinion, the real bad things start happening to her. Now he's already hit her.
Yeah.
And we know that because she had bruising and bite marks on her.
Mm-hmm.
And that, dude, I'm telling you right now, like, your daughter comes home, she's got bruising on her face. That's one thing.
Yep.
Then you're looking and you're like, you have bite marks on you? Oh yeah, that was from a fight at school.
Did you fight a werewolf?
From what? From how? I mean, I know kids can bite each other. I'm not saying that that's not something that can happen. But, geez, look into it. Look into what these consistent bruising.
Especially if there's biting involved.
Yeah, knowing that she's dating this older guy. Like, golly, it's all right there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all right in front of you. And that's what I'm saying. Like, when you said earlier, her parents are not victims in this.
No.
They were not.
No, Kellyanne Bates is the victim.
Yes. She's the victim. Her parents were very complicit in this whole thing.
I feel like that they are almost, I would say that they are nearly complicit. It's terrible what happened, and I'm really sorry about that. But they didn't do anything to stop it.
Yeah, complicit's not the right word.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I can't. I'm not even going to go that far and say.
Yeah. I would say that
they had the information there. They didn't act on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And like I said, you don't have to agree with that. Whoever's listening, that's just how I feel. This is a fundamental failure to control this situation, and I'm not going to back down about that. This terrible thing was allowed to happen because nobody was looking out for her the way they should have been.
Right. And
because it doesn't matter how mature you think she is. She's still a child.
She's a kid. She's a child. Yeah. So now she is under James's full control,
mm-hmm.
and she has lost all communication with her family.
Mm-hmm.
it said that she would send cards, quote unquote, she would send cards home, and they would be addressed in a different handwriting.
Yep.
So her parents knew that that wasn't her handwriting, and the cards weren't signed. And so this is what I feel like James's attempt to normalize this situation, to see like, to make her parents feel like everything's going great over here.
That's exactly what he's just trying to dampen suspicion.
Yep.
That's all this is. And he doesn't, everything's already there to make this incredibly suspicious, but this is just him being like, oh, yeah, she was upstairs the other day, and I think a couple of neighbors seen her while she was standing at a window.
Yeah.
So, yeah, obviously everything's fine, guys. And her family, who just lives, down the way, got a couple postcards. So, I mean, that's good.
Yeah.
They know she's alive, LOL.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Nothing to see here.
Let me tell you.
Everything's normal.
I live in Amarillo, Texas. And if my daughter lived in the same town as me and the only contact I got from her was a postcard in somebody else's handwriting, gonna think that's suspicious.
Yeah.
I don't care what kind of parent you think I am. That's friggin' weird.
Yeah. I'm going to be there.
Yeah.
And guess what?
Is there a return on dress on this? Because I'm showing up.
Yeah, I'm showing up. And if you don't let me into the house, then I'm going to say I would call the police.
Mm-hmm.
But more than likely what would end up happening is you just kick their door in.
Yeah.
And I'm going, because in my opinion, like if you don't let me see my daughter and I know she's there and I have some suspicion, I'm not going to allow any time to lapse between when I make that phone call. I'm just going to go get her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, bill me.
Yeah.
For that door, homie.
Yeah.
Because I'll take it off the hinges.
And if I have to go to jail for that, well, it is what it is. And
yeah.
And I don't know if, I just, that's my personal opinion. But so we're at the point where, like I said, no one's seen Kelly, no one's talked to her. We got these weird postcards, and then something strange happens where James shows up at the police station.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish I knew what the time frame was from when she left her home to when this happened.
Well, she was
17,
right.
So let's assume a year or less.
Yes,
somewhere,
a year or less. Yeah, I'd say that.
And this thing has already gone from she's still living at her parents' house.
Mm-hmm.
She moves out of her parents' house,
mm-hmm.
and in a year or less,
that's right.
She is dead.
That's right. He shows up to a police station and just says, "Hey, my girlfriend drowned."
My girlfriend drowned. They're like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, we're going at it." And like I said in the part one, some people looked at this as like a sexual type thing, and then other people pointed at it as like an argumentative type thing, which I believed it was argumentative. But he says, "Yeah, man, we're kind of going at it," and she drowned. Mm-hmm. Because that makes total sense. Sometimes when you're arguing with people, they drowned.
Yeah, sometimes you argue with people. You go into the bathroom where the tub is filled, and you just have it out in a tub of water.
Yeah, you're just arguing, and so you think, you know what? We got to talk this out. Let's get in the bathtub, and whoopsie daisy, someone drowned.
Yep. I mean, he didn't call the police.
No, he showed up.
He went there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's pretty bizarre.
Yeah.
Now, everybody, let's assume that this was an actual accident. We know it's not.
Yeah.
He killed her. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
But he doesn't call for help.
No.
He goes to the police station and says, "Hey, my girlfriend's dead. I tried to resuscitate her though."
And they're like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "She drowned in the bathtub."
Drowned in the bathtub.
They're like, "She just drowned in the bathtub?" And he's like, "Weirdest thing."
Yeah.
Weirdest thing. I mean, you guys are surprised? Think how I feel, man. I was in there.
Yeah, man, I just got here. And so the detective goes back. I'm assuming they send units, and a detective goes, what was his name? The murder inquiry was headed by Detective Sergeant Joseph Monahan of the Greater Manchester Police, who is quoted later saying, "I have been in the police force for 15 years, and I've never seen a case as horrific as this." That's probably true, and I'm really sorry to hear that for Detective Sergeant Monahan. But he gets there, and they start looking into this, and she is in a terrible state, to say the least.
Yeah. Now,
we don't need to go into all the details. It's all covered in the first episode, so I don't want to dive too much into that, because it's graphic and it's terrible. But I will bring up some things. She's horribly battered.
Yep.
Burned. Fractured bones. hair nearly has a portion of her skull scalped, which means that the hair and the meat that's connected to was pulled free of the skull. Yep. For those of you who don't know what scalping is, it can be done by pull force or with a blade, or even a serious blunt instrument can peel the flesh back, causing a scalping injury. These things don't just happen. You've seen the videos on the Facebooks and the TikToks where girls are in a, quote, cat fight, end quote, and they pull clumps of hair, and they're not scalped. So that just goes to show you what type of force is required to scalp a person when you're not using a bladed instrument.
Yeah.
But the thing that stuck out to me that made me want to cover this case, other than the absurd difference in the age, was that her eyeballs had been gouged from her skull.
Yeah, her eyes had been removed, and then she was still... This didn't happen at her death or after her death.
It happened previous before, which means she had to live X number of time, no less than 5 days, no more than 3 weeks, I believe is what it says. That this lunatic had removed her eyes, and her eye sockets also had other damage from a stabbing weapon.
Yes.
And I'm not even going to go into the details that I think how this might have happened. All you have to know is that it did happen. To enucleate somebody in any way is disgusting, to say the least.
Yep.
To know that you did that to somebody that you claim to care for makes it even more disturbing. I nearly said equally as disturbing, but that wouldn't have made sense. It's far more disturbing.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure this detective was like, what?
And then they found her blood, and that was one of the things that I didn't mention in the part one, but they found her blood in every single room in the entire house.
That's right.
So she had been tortured everywhere.
Everywhere.
It was like it didn't matter where she was or what she was doing or if she even had any sort of freedom. Because if you look at the fact that she spent a lot of her time tied to a chair or to a heating radiator, then how exactly did this happen to where the blood was everywhere? This could have been over a period of time.
Definitely over a period of time.
Because when it talks about that she had multiple stab wounds caused by knives, forks, and scissors, and then she had parts of her skin that had been clipped by pruning shears.
Yeah, sheared off.
Think about that. We're talking about the eyeballs. That's terrible. But think about having a portion of your skin clipped with pruning shears.
Oh, the pain.
It's
horrible.
Yeah, and then the fork. The weird things about fork, he was just doing all these things to torture her.
Yeah, he's just an absolute monster, and that's what got him his best jollies, was the fact that he was doing this and she had nobody to turn to. She couldn't get away. He could overpower her. He could tie her down. He could do whatever he wanted to her. But the guy was too much of I can't say that. Hold on. Of an idiot that once she finally passed away by drowning, he was like, oh, wait, I didn't get this far last time. Yeah. What do I do now? Oh, I'll just say she drowned and hope they don't ask questions. If you're wondering if this guy was slick, we know the answer is no. This guy wasn't slick. And they would come to find out later that he had attempted to drown some of his past lovers.
Yeah.
But in the shower, and at one time trying to hold down one of their heads in the kitchen sink. Mm-hmm. So my theory is that was part of his big fantasy. He wanted to drown somebody. And what better way to do it than to have somebody that has nowhere else to go?
Yeah.
And literally can't see to get there.
Yeah.
If they did have a place to go.
And you have no way of explaining any of this.
He doesn't even offer.
You can't. What I'm saying is he can't let her go now.
No.
He can't let her go back home.
Yeah,
he can't let her go back to school. She's 40 pounds, 50 pounds lighter than she was when she showed up.
Starving her.
She's bruised, beaten. She's got stab wounds all over her. She's got broken kneecaps, broken arms.
Crushed hands.
And he's just going to be like, oh, well, all right, well, see you later. Go home now. No, this is the only way that this ends.
Yeah, and And the drowning part to me sticks out because
he carries out that fantasy.
Right, that's huge. This wasn't just a way to finally end her, rest her soul.
Yeah.
I'm saying this was part of it. This was part of one of his absolutely demented fantasies, is he wanted to drown someone.
Yeah.
And later the pathologist would say that is the cause of her death, was drowning, because he wanted to keep her alive all that time, and that's exactly what he did.
Yeah, there was and when I pointed out in the part 1 about the crushed hands and how that I didn't know if it had happened just before her death or before that, is because there was another case here that happened that I kind of had information to, and one of the things that they talked about in this woman who was deceased is that she had been beaten basically her whole marriage in a way that they could hide it and no one would really know about it. Like her husband was hiding these things that he was doing to her.
Yeah.
But one of the things that they pointed out from her autopsy was that all of the bones in her hand, the majority of the bones in her hand had been broken multiple times over the last 40 years.
Goodness gracious.
Like just always, her hands at some point in time were probably always broken. And why would somebody do that? Why would you particularly break the hands or do things like that? And I think it's one of those things where, one, you can kind of, it's in plain sight, but you don't really notice a whole lot of times if especially if if your arm's in a cast, you're going to see it.
Exactly.
But you can have that control over them, and then you can also make it to where they are in a need for you.
Absolutely.
Like if you can't use your hands.
Your hand is the primary manipulator of your entire body. Without your hands, you can do very little.
Yeah.
Not without an extensive training and rehabilitation to learn to do those things. So it is just control. She couldn't walk. Yeah. And if she could walk, certainly not properly.
No, and that's what I think. It goes from the hands, maybe the arm, the kneecaps. But think about that. You smash someone's kneecaps so they can't walk.
Yeah.
It's like that. Oh man, what was that one movie where she puts the guy,
Misery?
Misery, yeah. Really.
Hobbles him.
That's what it is.
That's exactly what it is.
It's in the reverse, but that's what it is.
I know. Whenever you can't even say smashing somebody's kneecaps without immediately thinking of a mafioso crushing somebody's kneecaps because they owe him money. It's so terrible. Yeah. The first example that most people will go to is somebody doing it as a scare tactic, an intimidation tactic.
Getting your hands crushed in a vice.
That's right. You're getting your head crushed in a vice.
Yeah.
These
hands hit with mallets and hammers, and
right.
These are all things.
These are all things that only happen in your imagination in the world of crime. You don't just do that. That doesn't just happen unless it's a damn work accident. Yeah. And she wasn't working. She was trapped with a lunatic.
Yeah. And then, as we stated, he shows up to the police department, walks in there, tells them what they go to the house and start looking at it, and they're like, yeah, so some of this isn't going to work out. And then I think the worst thing that could have happened to her parents to kind of tie all that up is that they allowed them to come up to the hospital or wherever they were holding her body at, the morgue, whatever, just
to identify it or see it.
To identify her body. And it was very obvious that what he said happened to her wasn't the only thing. Now, they would later state that she did in fact drown, like you pointed out.
Yeah.
But it's odd to me to think that they were just going to, that James thought that they were just going to brush over all of this other stuff.
Ugh.
That they weren't going to, that you're not going to, and maybe he didn't care. Maybe he knew his ship was sunk, so he's like, whatever. And then when they get into asking him about it, he's like, well, she provoked me. She would say bad things about my dead mother, and, she really gave me hell on
yeah, she'd
on
really
some other
wind
thing.
me up.
Yeah, she'd wind me up, and then they're like, yeah, so what about the other stuff? And he's like, oh, sometimes she dared me to do stuff, and then she liked the pain side of things. Like he tried to spin it to say like, oh no, she liked that. Now there is a huge difference between, is it BDSM? Is that the terminology for that?
It is.
There's a huge difference between that, from what I understand, which is limited to this.
Yes.
There is a huge difference.
Yeah, most of it is consent.
Yeah, consent would be the big one.
You're like, hey, cool. You want to tie me up and paddle me, or any of the things that go into all that, which we're not exactly covering because it's not quite the same as what's going on here.
No.
But it's consent, and I find it hard to believe that a 14 to 16 to maybe 17-year-old was just like, you know what would really spice this up? Stab me with a fork.
Yeah.
No.
He's like, yeah. Do you like that? And she's like, yeah, but let's kick it up a notch. Tear my eyeballs out.
Oh, God, I know. It's terrible.
I mean, you can't.
There's no way to do it.
To get there.
No, absolutely not. This was a victimized girl, not a woman.
Yeah.
She never got there. This guy destroyed her physical being, secluded her away from the world, and lived out all of his most disgusting fantasies to completion.
Mm-hmm.
And then, guess what? He just went and was like, oh man, my girlfriend died. And you know why he probably did that? It's because he's 48.
Yeah.
And he knows his life is over. Yeah. Not just because he murdered somebody, but because he's over halfway through his life already.
Yeah. Yeah, he's already more than halfway there.
He's like, I just achieved everything I ever wanted.
And that's one of the things that I was trying to think my way through, because she has already lost contact with her family.
Mm-hmm.
Why wouldn't James just get rid of her body? Why would he? I was trying to think this through. Why would he just go to the police station and be like, hey, here's the deal. My girlfriend drowned. And they're like, okay, because they're going to know
right,
that something happened to her. Why didn't he try to get rid of the body? And that's something that I don't know if he thought through how it was going to be done. For all I know, maybe the dude didn't have a car. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't. And I have heard in some of the research that I did and read that he was unemployed.
Yeah, and not very well educated either.
Yeah, so I guess it's maybe safe to say that he could not think his way through how to get this done. I mean,
that's a really nice way to say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably because he's a friggin' idiot.
Yeah, he's a moron.
And after he completed his disgusting, like, hell-raising fantasy, he was like, oh, crap. I didn't get this far. Well, I thought about this. Now what do I do? Well, I'll just go turn in and say she drowned. Maybe they won't ask any questions because I look like such a trustworthy guy.
Yeah.
I'm not a nearly 50-year-old loser.
Yeah. Or he could have thought, you know what? I've completed everything I've wanted to do to save me from myself.
Mm-hmm.
It's best if I just go turn myself in now.
Maybe. I mean, he didn't offer a very good defense, and it didn't really matter either because it took less than an hour for the jury to decide that sicko was guilty.
Yeah, and if you're ever in a criminal trial and you come back after 1 hour and they're like, hey, the jury's reached a verdict, it's only because of one of two things. One, maybe the district attorney's office had a piss poor case and it showed.
Mm-hmm.
Or two, you're so screwed that really they walked in there and they're like, hey, what do you guys think? And they're like, oh yeah, he's guilty. And they're like, okay, well, let's all play solitaire for the next 55 minutes because they told us we couldn't leave.
Exactly. Yeah, they were like, anybody think he's not guilty? And everybody's like, no, mate.
Yeah,
he's guilty.
Yeah,
no, he needs to go straight to hell, like the boiler room of hell.
Yeah, fast ride to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, they didn't have the death penalty. And this is like one that, we've talked about the death penalty on this podcast before. And there is definitely arguments for it and arguments against it. And we've brought both of those.
Mm-hmm.
I think this would be 1 for 4.
Yeah, I would go so far as to say this guy needed the William Wallace death penalty treatment.
Yeah. Braveheart. Yeah. And
strung on the rack.
Yeah. And
drawn and quartered. Beheaded. Yeah. And I'd have watched the whole thing.
Yeah. And what's crazy to me is that I am a little bit familiar with the Texas prison system.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know that things do not fare very well for child rapists and child murderers when they go to prison. So much so that they usually have to send them to their own prison. where it's just child molesters. But in my opinion, I thought that something could have happened to him in prison. But didn't. And that was really unfortunate. And I'm sorry to say that. I'm sorry to say that I hope that somebody whacked him when he got to jail. But it didn't happen because he's still alive today.
Yeah.
Right now. Because when they say life in prison, that he got life in prison, then that means that he can do up to life. But he was eligible for parole after 20 years.
Right.
Now, so far, I know that he has probably come up for parole at least once. Based off the dates. But he hasn't gotten out yet. And I think that if anybody out there that lives, that is on that pardons parole division, whatever they call it, ever thinks to themselves that this is a man that could be rehabilitated, they should be removed from that board immediately.
Yeah, you can go ahead. You can head on home now.
Yeah, and I think that I don't think he'll ever get out of jail, but I think it's crazy that he was afforded the opportunity to get out of jail after what he did to this poor girl.
Yeah.
And he still has that opportunity because he's still alive right now.
I mean, the legal system is what it is. It's designed in a way that gives people second chances. And some people deserve them. Can't deny that. And some people sure as heck don't.
Yeah.
And this guy doesn't. He's a monster. He's a creep. He's a predator who tried to impose his will on other people and failed, and so he had to target somebody softer. And that's exactly what he did. And before we wrap this up, I do want to say, I know we said a lot of really strongly worded opinions in here, but those are just what they are. They're opinions. I'm entitled to mine, Justin's entitled to his, and everybody else is entitled to theirs. So, if you don't like what I said, then think what you want to think.
Yeah, it's all right.
There's no way I could ever see something like this and think that it's okay. It's not. People dropped the ball. Somebody got mutilated and murdered. And there were things that could have been done differently, and they weren't. And I'm not sorry for thinking that way, even though I could, at the same time, still feel sympathetic to those people.
Yeah. And that's the thing about I think both of us is that I don't really care what anybody's opinion is. I'll listen to anything.
Sure.
If you want to have a conversation about something and I don't agree with it, I'll still be all ears. I'll still entertain that. Now, will it be significant enough to change my mind? Well, that depends on the topic.
Sure.
Because it's absolutely happened before. I've had a strong stance on something before and had a conversation with someone and been like, oh, we've had conversations like that where both of us were like, woo, man, that's something I can consider. Now, in this case, I'm just telling you, no, that's not going to happen. But as far as the opinion goes, please, we want everybody to have their own opinion. These are just our opinions. But we do feel strongly about that.
Yeah, very strongly. This is horrible. Whether it happened in England, America, Canada, Mexico, any other countries in Africa, it doesn't matter. The fact that it happened at all, when I just feel like there were things that could have been done differently. Obviously, every scenario can go like that. It's not right, no matter where it happens on this little blue marble.
Yeah, and I think in this case, and like we said, it's hard to say, sad to say, because I know her parents feel terrible. I've seen interviews with her parents on it where, imagining that they had to go through this as well. But I'm sorry, it's now. James is the killer.
That's right.
He's the murderer.
Yes, he is the suspect. He is the guilty party.
Yes, but I will say it again. Her parents aren't victims because they allowed this to happen. Now, that's why I wanted to say, now James is the one who killed her. I'm not saying her parents are evil in that way.
No, absolutely not.
What I'm saying is that they had the ability to change this situation, and they didn't. Now, I also understand that the majority of us out there have never known anybody that this happened to, or any sort of similar situation. So this is probably the furthest thing from their mind. But one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this is because things like this can happen on smaller scales that are also damaging to people.
That's right.
And I know that her parents wanted to be the quote unquote cool guy, or they wanted to allow her to have her space.
Of course.
And I think any parent is like that in some capacity.
Absolutely.
But you can't let it go like this. You have to check up on your children. You have to know who they're hanging out with. You have to still be involved in their life, because as parents, it's up to us to mold our children into grown adults, into human beings.
As functioning as possible.
Functioning as possible. And it needs to be in the best way possible. And allowing your teenage child to make all of their decisions for themselves can only end in a bad way, I think, for the most part.
Yeah, they need guidance.
I'm not saying that every situation ends like this.
No, of course not.
Thank God. But you have to be able, you got to be there.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be involved. And I know it stinks sometimes to have to get in your kids' business and see what they're doing, or look on their phones, or check their social media, or look at what their gaming systems, or whatever the scenario is. But you got to.
That's right.
You have to be involved.
You should never, ever, ever have to look back and feel bad about asking how somebody is doing.
Yeah.
About wondering who they're seeing, what they're up to, knowing what's going on in your kid's life. That's guilt-free. Because here at the Murder Project, we like to say, head up, eyes up, stay alive. These are things we're talking about. What to look out for.
Yeah.
How to notice these things. Not everybody has this type of training or this skill set.
Or intuition or anything.
But even though she did, she said specifically her hairs on the back of her neck stood up.
Oh, yeah. No, she did.
That's gut instinct.
Yeah. I'm talking about in general. Some people just...
Right, some people don't. But we all know, if you know somebody, especially if they're your child, you have a baseline for them. You always do. No matter what age they get, you have a baseline for how they act. If they start acting very differently, there isn't any professional in behavior out there that wouldn't tell you that is a sign.
Yes.
Ask. Ask. The least you can do is ask. They don't want to tell you? Okay, but you asked. But also, never let your 14-year-old date a 32/48-year-old man. It doesn't matter who you are or who this person is. You don't do that, and I'll die on that hill.
All right. I'm with you on that one. So, all right. Well, I think you have anything else you want to add in for this one?
No, I'm all good, my man.
Yeah, I think this was this was a tough one. It was hard to go through. I think there's a lot of opinions, definitely, and it's something that we wanted to cover because of that fact that Mike said. We're trying to give different takes, scenarios, outlooks, all of these things, and put them together, and so that people can see them and say, okay, well, maybe we can learn something from that, and that's what we hope to do. So, anyways, I think we're going to close it out for this time, and we'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Murder Project. We appreciate it so much. Our downloads are going up, our numbers are going up, and we have you guys to thank for that. So thank you guys so much. If you're looking for us on any of the social media platforms, you can find us on Facebook at The Murder Project. If you need to search for us, please type in facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're looking for us on Instagram, you can find us at The Murder Project. And if you're looking for us on the old Twitter box, we are at The Murder Pod. Also, don't forget, if you're listening on any platform, go in there, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and hit that 5 stars.
Let me get them 5 stars.
I'm telling you, we have to get past these algorithms, and the way that they base those off of is by interaction with the listeners. So we would appreciate it so much if you would go in and do that for us. And for those who have already, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this episode of The Murder Project. We look forward to talking to you again. But before we go, please remember,
head up, eyes up,
and stay alive.